Thanks again, everybody, for joining us today. It's a great honor and pleasure to connect again. And our session or panel is going to be on the Internet of Things in healthcare. We started the day on doing this and talking about the Internet of Things. And I would say that the panelists that I would love and I'm greatly honored to introduce are really, nobody could do a better understanding of the Internet of Things than Dr. Claus Jensen, who is the Chief Digital Officer at Sloan Kettering, whom really we have great thanks and appreciation. And we're very grateful to, because he's behind the success of the C3 Summit that we are living as we speak. Also, we have His Excellency Dr. Amin Al-Amiri, Undersecretary of the United Arab Emirates Ministry of Health, who really has been a great colleague and became a great friend as well, as we kind of continue to learn from and see what the UAE is doing at this point in time in regard to the Internet of Things. And thirdly, it's a great honor to welcome again Dr. Larry Schwartz, who is the chairman of radiology at Columbia University, who again will bring an incredible perspective from the radiology field to the Internet of Things. So with this said, I would like to start maybe with Claus. So Dr. Jensen, tell us more. Like I kind of gave my kind of like humble understanding of the Internet of Things, but tell us your expert opinion on that. What is it?
A good question, and in some ways is often misunderstood, right? We think of smart devices and Internet of Things in terms of wearables. I'm wearing a smartwatch and whatever else we carry around, but in its most basic form, the Internet of Things is very simply the idea that you can take things, devices, and connect them using the same protocols that you have on the internet. So what you're getting is a mesh of potentially billions of connected devices. What you're also getting is a problem, because all these devices are sending data mostly on a continuous basis. And now you have to figure out what to do with it. So the rise of the Internet of Things came from that. The fact that you will have millions, hundreds of millions, billions of connected devices, they're all communicating on the internet. And you're going to have to figure out what you're going to do with all the data that they send. That's the most basic definition.
So if we were to think about what can this benefit us from, and you mentioned, you know, the connectivity among machines, but does this mean that we are monitoring for longer times? Can we have like a physician now that we're in healthcare discussion, like have a 24/7 contact with their patients? Or how would we see that?
That's actually the big difference. And it's a great question, because many of these things are sensors. The thing about sensors is they are always on. And that's the whole point of a sensor. Whether that sensor is measuring your pulse, my watch does. Whether it's measuring your movement, my watch does. Whether it's measuring your amount of oxygen in your blood, which if you take a pulse oximeter, those are now also connected devices and they can send information. It could be sensors that are sitting in an ambulance, which is on its way from someone's home to a hospital. So you can put sensors on a whole bunch of different kinds of stuff. The more time passes, the smarter sensors we get. And to point out your question, those sensors are always on. They never stop, right? They will happily send information at whatever interval we've asked them to all the time. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 12 months a year, they'll just keep doing it. The amount of data is staggering. We're talking petabytes. A petabyte is a lot of data. If you think in terms of megabytes, that's what you usually think about when you have a computer. Then when you have 1,000 of those, that's a terabyte. That's about the biggest hard drive you can have on a personal computer. Multiply that by 1 million, then you're getting into petabytes. So petabytes are pretty big. And all these devices are generating many of those every day.
So if we have that much information, and as you said, because it's really collected like nonstop, how much the human mind can really connect from that? Or do we need machines to even help us analyze that information?
Well, that's the problem, right? And that's actually where technology comes in. We're now talking an amount of information that humans cannot possibly process. It's not possible. Right? So there are three fundamental ways that you can use that information stream. One is you can do a real-time stream to a dashboard. That works. Right? We've seen that. That's what we do in say, a hospital setting. You put sensors on people, you stream it to a dashboard. You don't save it. It's the stream of consciousness, and you have human eyes looking at that dashboard, and your human will try to detect something is off and do something if something is off. The other thing is you might put event filters on it. Like, again, if you're in a hospital setting, there might be an alarm. If your pulse goes above or below something, then there might be an alarm. Now, these alarms can be digital. So you can put filters on the stream of events from all these sensors, and you can look for certain patterns. When you have a pattern that's meaningful, you can give a human a heads up that, hey, something happened, I'm going to have to do something about it. You may even put some automation in that if certain things happen, there's certain actions you're going to take. And the third is analytics. Now we're looking deeper insight. It's not the obvious patterns that you can detect and say, hey, something happened, but it's more of a trend analysis. It's looking at a large amount of data and saying, is there a deeper insight I can generate from that? It's not actually an either or. All these three are valuable in their own right for different kinds of things. I'll give you an example. We actually did do the dashboarding when during the first months of the COVID-19 pandemic, we had to send cancer patients home, and we weren't sure what the interaction would be between cancer treatments and this virus. So we sent them home with pulse oximeters, and we ran telemetry to a dashboard, and we had actual clinical staff that was looking at these dashboards on a continual basis. As we got smarter, we started coding into that solution. There were certain things we were looking for and certain thresholds when we would give alerts. And now we're into the third sort of type of use, which is we're trying to figure out what can we learn from it. Can we learn something about cancer biology from all this amount of data that we got? So all three have their uses for different things.
Well, that's great. So to summarize, and His Excellency Dr. Amin, it's so nice to see you again today. And we heard about, what the Internet of Things is not about a simplistic perspective, but more it's about like this great connectivity and ability to connect different operations, but at the same time in a continuous fashion, time-wise, i.e. 24/7. At the same time, as Dr. Jensen brought up, is the importance of making sure that we are able to analyze the data. And this is really where kind of like it becomes at a more complex level. So let's take it from a perspective of a country, the United Arab Emirates, who is moving way ahead of the curve in regard to how to build in that connectivity. I would love to hear your experience with that in the UAE and the Minister of Health. You are on mute, I believe. Dr. Amin, I think you are on mute.
Oh, yes. Thank you very much, my brother.
No problem.
Allow me to first of all it's good evening here. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to join you again, Dr. Ghassan. Allow me to share with you what's the advanced health innovation, which was since long time, and especially during the COVID pandemic situation, was implemented in UAE. Allow me to share with you some of the slides, just in a hurry time. Does the slides are clear?
Yes, go ahead, Dr.
In fact, first of all, we believe in ideas. We believe in brains. We believe in the I can say the innovations which it comes from a human being, and therefore I can start in showing you this slide that His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, the Vice President, Prime Minister, ruler of Dubai, says that wherever the brains, ideas, innovation goes, for sure there will be some sort of changes and some sort of developments could happen by tomorrow, wherever those brains and ideas will go. And therefore we invest, first of all, not only in new innovations, technologies, but we invest on human being, and we allow the human being, the people with brains, with ideas, with innovative ideas to share with us and to support us. And therefore we try to use the data analysis and interneting of the things to help us. But there were some sort of pillars, which was the main pillars which allowed us to go on forward in improving our services. And on the top of it was the vision of the UAE, that to have the highest class of healthcare system to be implemented. Despite that, the growing of the aging population led us to concentrate on technologies to reach their expectation. And I'm quite sure all of you know the economical burden from the NCDs, despite the greater expectation of the community, the higher educated people you have, their expectation will be raised. And also the medical tourism, which we are now the center for the region for receiving the patients from different countries. And despite that, that we are providing our community with highest quality of care. And this really allowed us, on the right side of the slide shows you that we were able to implement the highest innovative technologies, and those technologies allowed also the healthcare investment by the government and the private sector to rise. By 2019, almost 56 billion was the healthcare investments in UAE, and it is expected to reach almost 89 by 2024. But going into the details, now the current technology and the mobile phone in the community is one of the I can say tools which we will be able to provide our community with quality of care and with our healthcare services. This is a busy slide, which is sort of an example that how we are trying to use the data of the I can say the patients and I can say the systems which analyzes those data, and how we are trying to convert those data by using different type of I can say smart applications by connected to the internet to serve our community. I don't want to go into the details, but I will just share with you in explaining two of them. At the bottom, at the middle, there is Hayat in English, Hayat in Arabic, which it means the life. And this is the usage of AI, artificial intelligence, and how to serve the community and allowing them to be an organ donor in 3 steps. Within 2 minutes, they can use their smart application in their mobile phone, and they can donate their organs after the death within just 2 minutes and 3 steps. On the left side of it, UAE Radar, which is the smart application for adverse reaction of different drugs, which is being used in UAE and connected with the WHO. This is an example, and we have another examples of using the technology in serving our patients. On the right side is the X-ray, which we are trying to use the AI in reading those chest X-rays and to define if they have open tuberculosis or not. Also the robotic systems, which also is being used, and the tele-ICU service, all is by using the AI and by using the data analysis and interneting of the things to serve our community. This is another example which we are using 3D projection mapping to educate asthmatic children. Once we will fix the nebulizers to them, this is in one of the beautiful rooms in the women's and children's maternity hospital called Dr Ghassan. We educate them and we give them a sort of public awareness while they are taking their treatment. Another example is robotic pharmacies. On the left side is the existing pharmacies, which the dispensing will be done by the pharmacist on the left side, but on the right side, the 5 photos is the example that how we shifted to the high tech and allowing the robots to serve the community and to avoid human errors and to allow the pharmacist to focus on patient's care and other valuable added tasks. During the pandemic situation, in fact, we try to use the tech and the technology and to be able to serve our patients while they are at home, while they're at their offices, and not to allow them to be exposed to the virus and to come and visit the clinics or the hospitals. And during this crisis, everything was shut down, but we were functioning extremely on a higher level and to provide them with the high technology and using the internet to serve our community and our patients. This is another example. At the middle is the vehicle by Huawei that by using AI and through the internet, we could reach the houses and the villas to provide them with medications or to provide them with the PPEs and with the sanitizers. With just a small vehicle, it was used to be run by distance through the clinics, and the car, it moves by itself. And there are many examples. I don't want to go into the details, but those innovative ideas were introduced in our country, and one of it is the new technology of using the vaccines for protection of our community. And this is my photo. I'm taking the vaccine for COVID-19. The wearable items were there, but they are, I can say, it's not the major, I can say, part of our system to use the internet and use the technologies to serve our community. The main thing is the artificial intelligence, robotics, the 3D printing, virtual augmented reality, and using of the nanotechnology is also a part of now all those programs and genome sequencing to serve our next generation by the coming next 50 years plan by 2071. And today we had one of the programs with His Excellency the Minister to be connected with the community and asking them how they will be able to help us. This leaded 88% of our hospitals to be accredited by JCI, because we are using the high-tech patient safety. It's on the top of priority. We are #1 outside US to be accredited by JCI. And there are many examples that this sort of, I can say, policies allowed the international hospitals to join us. Cleveland, Abu Dhabi is there, Seoul National University Hospital from South Korea, the Global Health from Sweden, and American Hospital, which they have affiliation with Mayo Clinic in the state. But all those interneting of things and introducing the internet and nanotechnologies needs the infrastructure, and the infrastructure to support introducing of such technologies is the legislation and the laws, which it allows you to introduce those innovative ideas and the new innovations to support you and to implement those technologies. And for the last 4 years, we were able to update almost 36 number of our regulations to support introduction of the new technologies. And I will conclude my presentation in just showing you one of the statements from His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, that innovation is what defines our status among nations and the value we add to the world around us. And whenever we say we are introducing the new innovations at the healthcare sector, which it means that we are serving our community, which consists of 200 different nationalities living in peace in our country. This is I love to share with you, a short presentation and to, allow you to understand what is the existing situation in our country, and to make sure that we will be able to share our experience with different people all over the countries in the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Amin. That's great. And as you and I spoke, there's a lot of accolade and appreciation for the great presentation that you're showing today and you showed back in September. And a question for you, have you seen or faced any specific challenges in those kind of approaches for the Internet of Things?
The challenges, one of the challenges which you face is that how you will be able to allow the community to be adopted to those new technologies, not your health professionals and not your hospitals and the clinics, but mainly the people which they were not used to the majority of those technologies, or I can say the ways of providing them the treatments. But on the other part was the legislations in which we were able to, by end of 2019, to have a new law for the telemedicine and telecommunication, and this law allowed using the data analysis and the data in our hospital in a way that privacy and the protection of this data will work protected. Maybe slight challenges were there between the companies and between the legislation department, but everything was under the control, but there was no major challenges with us, in fact.
Oh, that's great. Actually, you bring in like a great segue for the next question that I had. And back to Dr. Jensen. So Claus, who owns that information? That's exactly what Dr. Amin is asking too.
That's an interesting question. And I don't think there's any firm regulatory basis for it. Certainly not one that's internationally valid. Generally, you go by whatever the rules are around consent. So if you have given consent to do telemetry and as part of treatment, etc., I'd say that information is fair game in terms of the provider organization using it. That's different from, again, my personal watch, which unless I give an explicit permission for someone to get that data, then that's mine. The various technology companies out there that are producing these kinds of equipment, and many of them linked to smartphones, etc., are creating capabilities for you to have your own sort of virtual vault of your healthcare information. But in interactions where you're actually using it, you have to give people permission to get access. So it's a complex web of consent, permissions, who can use what, and basically that's a complication that in many cases is more difficult to deal with than security. Everybody talks about security. I'd say compliance is the harder part, actually, and where you need to make sure that you're on the right side of not just what's legal, but also what's ethical.
Ghassan, can I?
Please go ahead, Dr. Amin.
In fact, 100% who owns those data is the patient himself, first of all, and it is right that he's the one to allow us as a government to share those data with the others, or to do the analysis by taking the consent from the patients. But the more important, Ghassan, here is that data protection, because we face one of the challenges with some of the private companies that, like the companies which they work on the radiology department, and with the like an MRI machines or the X-ray machines, those data, it's being stored at the cloud, and some of the companies, their cloud is in Europe, but there is no security in how to protect those data. And today the data of the patient today is, maybe someone is a normal person, but today maybe tomorrow is one of the VIPs, and you have to protect those data, even a normal person. And therefore we try to adopt a new regulation that all the data has to be stored in the cloud in the UAE, and to be protected by the sharing management between the security department and the Ministry of Health and Prevention and those private companies. Although this will bring a sort of extra economical burden on the companies, but this is the right of each single country to have their own policy and their own system that it protects the data, and to make sure that those data won't be shared with the other countries or with some unknown companies, and it could be stolen from the cloud also. And therefore, data protection is very important, and we have to be very careful as a government, and we have to have policies, regulations, how to protect those data.
That's very important. Actually, you're reading my mind, Dr. Amin. Actually, back to Dr. Jensen. Klaus, this is a quite fascinating question, comment on all what we heard. And along that line, I'm always fascinated, and it just happened that I'm doing some clinical work at the moment in regard to research and clinical trials. And I'm fascinated by our requirement, at the same time by how the EU specifically have built in around GDPR and the right to forget. Your thoughts? I know you're smiling because it's complex.
That's complicated, yeah. I mean, if you look at privacy legislation, one of the latest trends is that to drive consumer protection and protection of privacy, the EU has the GDPR regulation, which basically gives you certain rights as a consumer. You have the right to see what people know about you. That can be difficult in an IoT setting. How much data was actually stored? So let's say I stored a lot of data about you because I actually stored all telemetry data. How do I share it with you? How do I actually give you access to that data? That's an interesting problem. More importantly, GDPR also has a provision around the right to forget. Right? If I decide that I don't want you to use my data anymore, there are certain exclusions for healthcare data, but in general, I have to delete all the data that I collected about you. And how would I do that if that data is actually used for multiple purposes? How far does it go? Is it okay to keep the de-identified data? The penalties for breaking these regulatory requirements are quite severe. The courts have not yet spoken in terms of exactly where the boundary is. Most people expect that it's okay to keep de-identified data, but we don't really know. And then you see other countries picking up the same thing. There is a California Consumer Protection Act that is taking some of the same path as GDPR is in Europe, even though they did say that healthcare information is explicitly excluded. So increasingly, the regulatory compliance environment is no longer just about what you are allowed to use initially. It's also how you react to changes in relationships over time, and in some cases, requests to be deleted.
Amazing, amazing. Let's try to switch a little bit to the science part. And we have, again, Dr. Schwartz, who is, as I mentioned, the chair of radiology at Columbia. And Larry, in what Claus mentioned, we brought in, and also Amin mentioned, is AI. And my understanding, my simplistic view is an X-ray is an X-ray, it's a picture, it's a piece of plastic, has an image on it. But where's radiology nowadays?
Yeah, so, radiology is clearly part of the Internet of Things, but it only represents a small part. It's frequently highlighted, I would say, because it is now fully digital. I haven't seen a piece of plastic in a while. That's a good thing. So it is fully digital, and there is a lot of data there that can be mined. And as we've seen examples of, just previously by Dr. Amin, the example in tuberculosis. I think equally important and perhaps even more interesting from the scientific perspective is how this data mixes together and how it, interacts, can inform some of the other clinical data, and how that clinical data can inform imaging as well. So I think that that's a, really, really important aspect of this. I'll just tell you a brief, kind of COVID anecdote from one of my colleagues, not at this institution, nor at your institution, but they were doing a brief presentation. They were talking about a quick AI algorithm that they used on X-rays and on CT scans to predict, patients' outcome or the need for ventilatory assistance with COVID. And they had a very nice correlation. And, I asked the simple question, well, what was the correlation with O2 sat and the blood gases? And I got kind of a blank look. And I didn't pursue it further, but, clearly, looking at one source of data, one stream of data in isolation is probably not, the way to go. And as we've heard, this technology or these technologies really allow us to do that.
Well, that's incredible. And along that line, Larry, to carry it further, exactly as you mentioned, a certain imaging can be translated into numbers. And this brings us to another important component, which is what's the difference between data, which is like, for example, the collection of those numbers into an image versus raw data. From your perspective, who owns what?
Well, you know, we've heard the experts speak, and I'll try to be, and I agree completely, but I'd also like to be a little bit provocative. In the world of AI and in the ability to utilize this technology, I wonder if ownership, or maybe not ownership, but the secure use of data may change. Because clearly the secure use of data can help society and help individuals. And in fact, you know, most of our healthcare systems to a certain, you know, extent are government funded. And, you know, so the government, society, people are putting in those resources, and shouldn't we all be able to benefit from it? Now, you know, this is kind of, I think, you know, a relatively new concept. You know, certainly we've seen this in individual basis, you know, in clinical trials and things like that, you know, phase 1 trials where, you know, patients kind of volunteer for that type of work. But, you know, here's yet another opportunity we have by coalescing data, by aggregating data in a really secure fashion to benefit society, to benefit, you know, humankind. And I wonder then if, you know, some of these paradigms, again, completely securely, you know, entrusted with data, will actually change, maybe not about ownership, but about usage.
That's incredible. I would like to switch gear a little bit and back to Dr. Amin. And you gave us an amazing example about what the UAE is doing in regard to this whole, you know, plethora of information and how to maneuver to, of course, the benefit of people and humanity. Along that line, and from the context of what Dr. Abou-Alfa was talking to us this morning about in regard to COVID-19 pandemic, can you please explain to us a little bit more detail about the tracking of COVID-19 patients in the UAE, anything along those lines using the Internet of Things?
Yes, in fact, the traceability of people with positive results of COVID-19 were done by using technologies like watches, and it was connected through the internet with the central, I can say, central security department at the capital in Abu Dhabi, that each person who was tested positive, we forwarded a sort of a watch to him that he can wear it. It's a wearable item, and this is connected through the internet with the main center, that they can define the movement of that person, because he will be asked to be under the quarantine for 14 days at their house, or the hotels and the buildings which was allocated to host them if they don't have the ability to stay at their house, if they don't to be away from the other family members. And those small devices, it's a wearable item. Through the internet, we were able to, monitor the movement of those people, and we succeeded very much in controlling them. Very rarely we found that they don't comply with the guidelines, and they move out of the I can say their house or their hotel. Therefore, this was one of the small examples that we used to use in monitoring the the positive patients during the 14 days of the quarantine.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Amin, and we're very happy to see what the UAE is doing in that regard, something exemplary, if anything. I know you might have to leave us early, which, by the way, we thank you again for being with us, and thanks for all what you're doing for your country and for your people. And I know your obligations are, asking you that you leave us early, which is totally fine. And this was a great presentation on your part, but thank you. And with this, I move on. Oh, thank you so much.
I do apologize that I have to leave because I have another conference in just 6 minutes.
No worries at all. We're totally thoughtful of that. Thank you again.
And it was my pleasure.
Thank you. So Claus, back to you. And this is a great segue to the next point. We heard what a government can do with the data. And let's put aside that, yes, we are protecting the privacy and what have we, but please teach us a little bit more, which I know it's one of the key elements of the digital transformation that you're moving and leading at Memorial. What is the institutional asset of the data? How do you read that?
I think that the question that goes beyond Internet of Things data, and it really starts getting at how do you get a longitudinal view of what's happened to an individual over time. Whether that's data related specifically to disease, within cancer, it could be data related to a lesion over time, and you can have multimodal data from scans to biopsies to other kinds of things. That's one type of data. Whether it's contextual data like what you get from biometric telemetry, Internet of Things, etc. Whether it's environmental data, which relates to where do you live, how do you live, what's your lifestyle. Increasingly, we find that for many diseases, cancer is one of them. We can't explain everything just by the clinically related information. Take cancer as an example. We know how cells metastasize. We don't know why. Right? Cells are not supposed to wander in your body, yet sometimes they do. Trying to answer some of these questions necessitate getting a much broader perspective of what does the environment around this individual, around this disease actually look like. So one of the things we're doing at MSK is we've embarked on a journey to build this unified data fabric. What's a unified data fabric? It's what it says. Take all the data you have available and access to and put it into a unified environment that actually connects the data. You may not understand all of it. Take the genome as an example. We understand a certain percentage of it. The rest we don't understand, but store all of it. And then start applying a combination of human intelligence and machine intelligence to try to gain insight from the data, which then in turn informs that hypothesis, and hopefully you learn something from it that's actually useful. But first and foremost, many of the advanced analytics tools we have available to us are prone to getting misled by bad data, data that's disconnected, data that has a bias. My favorite example is, it wasn't us, but there was a hospital that was trying to learn how to identify disease and disease progression based on images. And because they want to train this algorithm as well as possible, they took images from the best equipment they had and they ran it through the machine learning. And it worked great in tests. And then they got to production and none of it made sense. It turned out they had taught the AI algorithm to recognize images from that particular piece of equipment. Because it turned out that they were using that piece of equipment for the patients that had the most progression of disease. So usually you could associate the image coming from that machine with disease progression, and the machine learning algorithm happily learned how to recognize images from that piece of equipment. That's data bias and it's algorithm bias, and you don't know it until you start looking at it. So I don't think we will be in an environment where we can just throw machine learning at hard problems anytime soon. It's a combination of human intelligence and machine intelligence. And there's, hard work involved in making sure that your data is clean, it's high quality, and it does not have an unexpected bias.
Well, that's fascinating. I can see that Larry is already excited about that, because Larry, I'm going to give you just a scenario and maybe you can translate that into a very important component of the field that you and I will do, which already Claus mentioned, which is regard to clinical research. I remember 20 years ago, if I were to do a clinical trial, and let's say I'm supposed to record what the blood pressure of the patient, you know, myself, the nurse, or a researcher will just write a number and that's it. Now you have to look at the source data. In other words, you have to go to the machine that took the blood pressure and generate that number. And as such, we're really making it way more complex. We probably have the ability to say, yes, this is what it was recorded at that time, but we're just generating an immense amount of data. And as we just heard from Claus, how to put it together might be a little bit complex. Your thoughts on that? I think you're on mute.
It definitely is complex. And I think, you know, a big part of it is not only do we have to put it together, we have to understand what the needs are, and we have to, what the needs are for the greater complexity of the data, for the better precision of the data. You know, many of the things that we're doing in imaging, for example, help us with AI, help us with accuracy and precision. However, you know, the metrics that we use to evaluate, or you use to evaluate in a clinical trial, maybe hasn't changed yet. So the greater precision and accuracy actually doesn't actually translate into benefit either in clinical research or for the patient. So you really have to begin to connect those two. And I think we are taking those, you know, steps to do that now. So it's not just, you know, data collection and data analysis, but it's also the output of that will, you know, greatly vary and will change over time.
To go back to research one more time, and Claus, I know we're going to have a great presentation that you'll kindly give tomorrow in regard to the Internet of Things from digital transformation that you're leading at Memorial, as I just said. And one component, and you know, I'm a big fan of the great work that you do, and I know that you have the priorities that are lined up, but I'm mostly fascinated by the one about how you bring the digital world model into the mouse research that we do quite a bit at Memorial here.
So it's a fascinating topic, and it's the beginning of a journey. If you look at how we have traditionally done basic research, to some degree translational research, we start with insight. You formulate a hypothesis, you validate your hypothesis, usually in what has traditionally been a mouse model. You're going to have to try things out, and experimenting on humans is generally not a good idea. The timeline from first discovery to meaningful impact on standard of care is regularly in the 10 to 15 year time range. That's a long time. And it's an unusually long time in the kind of environment we live in, the world we live in now. 10 to 15 years, you got to be crazy. Right? It can't be that long, but it is. Because you only have biological models to test these things out, and you really don't want to do bad things to humans. So it takes time. What if it was possible to supplement that standard of testing things out in the mouse using different mechanisms? Could you gain new insight? Could you accelerate the cycle? So maybe it wasn't 10 to 15 years, maybe it was 5. Historically, it was like, you know, that's great, but no. Increasingly, I see researchers, and I'm not an expert, right? But when I discuss it with our research teams, they start talking about the human as the model. So instead of looking at the pieces, they're beginning to see the human as a system, and they're trying to understand all the parts of the system. There are certain things you can do with what's called organoids, which is basically a chunk of human tissue, and you can try things out on that in the same way you would do on a biological mouse model. But technology and computational capabilities are becoming increasingly important as we're trying to move back up the stack. Right? We went from a whole human physiology all the way down to what happens inside a cell. Genomics, proteins, the cell biology. And now we're trying to build it back up and say, so how does the cell work in the context of something like a tumor? And what's the composition of a tumor? Because it's not just cancer cells. And how does the tumor work inside the organ? And what happens inside the system that represents the human? And the amount of insight and data we have for that totality of the environment of the human is now at a level where trying to prove that out in mouse models or trying to have humans understand it is becoming increasingly difficult. So computations are becoming important to reason about the combined mouse-human system. And then there's the, but what if we could also create a digital twin model of the human that took all these bits and pieces of data and information and made the digital version of that data modelable. And now we unleash a combination of human and machine intelligence on it to try to gain new insight. And that becomes part of the cycle of gaining insight and proving out a hypothesis. You can imagine that it's faster to try out new things in a digital model than is to try it out on the mouse population. And even though mice grow quickly, they don't grow that quickly. You can have a computer reason out some of these things faster. So a fascinating area of exploration, that's all it is at this point in time, is can you put together the mouse model, the human model, and the digital twin model and shorten the cycle of discovery and the time that it takes to get into standard of care. That's one of my sort of future projects that's not something that's going to bear fruit within the next 6 months, nor do I know if it's expected to. But in a 5 years time frame, it might be transformational in how we do research.
Wow, that's fascinating. Larry, along that line, and I remember your team and yourself, of course, you presented data at the ASCO meeting, I think back in San Francisco, about like a read on colorectal cancer radiology can tell you much more than simply just, okay, bigger or smaller. Tell us a little bit along that same line that Claus is talking about. How much data can you pull out of a radiologic image? Enough that even you can do a diagnostic component, prognostic one, markers, etc. Your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think there are a lot of biologic correlates that you can do that can be performed with imaging or with more sophisticated image analysis. And many of these correlations are now driven by AI. Again, I don't think that they could be used alone in isolation, but they could certainly, really help to inform the treating physician or the clinical trialist further. We think using these technologies that we can gain further insight, for instance, into tumor mutation status, maybe even combine with circulating tumor cell assay rather than an actual physical biopsy. That might be helpful. Or I think, and the work that you're referring to, actually just published in clinical cancer research, would be to shorten or decrease the size dramatically of a clinical trial by adding the precision and accuracy and looking at different tumor kinetics that are driven that drive the patient to progress and fail and ultimately survive longer. So we think that this type of additional information can help not only on the individual patient basis, but let's say in drug approval or regulatory approval, potentially really even decrease the size of the trial. It is unfortunate that it takes such a long time to get these biomarkers approved and into practice. And, I agree, I wish there was some way that we could kind of short circuit that and get more rapid regulatory acceptance of some of these technologies, while at the same time really not doing harm.
Incredible. We thought we'd just take a picture and look at it and look how much we can pull out of imaging. Back to you, Claus. Let's go back to the patients. And no doubt that with the pandemic, no doubt a lot of roadblocks happened, but fascinating, there were a lot of bridges that happened. And how do you see that connecting with the patients all over the world? And we have today like a great audience from everywhere, from Asia, the Middle East, North America, Europe. Like how can the Internet of Things help patients connect with physicians wherever they would like to take an opinion from? And specifically what Memorial is doing, if anything, about that?
I think the first thing to realize is it is not a technology problem. And it never was. It's a care model problem. If you just throw technology after contacting patient, that's all you do, you will have a discombobulated, disconnected, not very good experience, right? Because the rest of the care model around the technology didn't change. If you learned anything from the pandemic, and that's certainly the case for MSK and every one of my colleagues I have a conversation with, the same thing, is it wasn't about the technology in isolation. It wasn't about the care model in isolation. It was about everybody working on the same problem, which is what does a different care model look like that is hybrid in nature and blends the kind of things you do hands-on with the kind of things you can do remote. But it was really a matter of redesigning the care model, including both the clinical operational components and the technology operational components that supports it. My own belief, the shift to a hybrid care model is permanent. I don't see that genie going back into the bottle. There are all kinds of regulatory constraints that still exist of various sorts. There are all kinds of questions around financial and reimbursement models. But I really think people have gotten so used to this notion of a hybrid care model that we're not going back. Exactly what it looks like, nobody knows. I can tell you this though. I think if we don't get to the point where this is a single care model that ties together seamlessly any point of care, be that inpatient, outpatient, or in the home or on the move, we collectively failed. The technology exists to tie it together, not easily, but it can be done. The challenge is it doesn't exist out of the box, so you're going to have to stitch it together yourself. In some cases, you're going to have to develop pieces, which over the years will mature to be more of an out-of-the-box you can buy. And you have to work very closely with your colleagues on the clinical side to actually pull it off. And take a televisit as an example. We all think about the fact that we're on this kind of device and we're having an audio-video conversation. That's not the hard part. We're sitting on Zoom, you can use WebEx, you can use Teams, it's easy. What's hard is how you schedule it, how you make sure the right people are available at the right time, how you manage the caregivers and friends and family that want to join on the patient side, how you pull in your clinical trial nurse or your interpreter or your nutritionist or the psychologist and all the other people that you need to have this work, how you make sure that people get the right tests before the visit, which is now virtual, so you kind of have to test things out when you have people in a physical setting. How do you make sure the equipment works up front and that the patient and their family and caregivers know what to do? What do you do if somebody is late? What do you do after the visit in terms of there's a teledisposition and follow-ups? How do you do that in the context of an integrated scheduling so that everything just works seamlessly and easily? That's the hard part. But everything around the visit is the hard part. Doing the visit itself, piece of cake.
That's fascinating. You bring very important component, which brings us back to the human element of all of this, because after all, you need somebody to turn on the machine at least. So by all means, I agree with you on that. Along that line, I'm just fascinated. I heard some data, and I would like to hear from you as well, because this is along the subject that you're bringing up. If you are in a virtual connectivity for a meeting, we have seen that the comfort zone is kind of evolving with everybody because it's not really how we met before. And we have seen that productivity might be affected by if people are being seen or not. In other words, if their camera is on or not. Any thoughts on that? Like why the visual is so important as much as the audio is?
In some ways, it comes back to human biology. I mean, our senses are tied into the way our brains work in different fashions. And you should go look up the literature. I haven't in a while. Actually, you get more sensing impressions from your eyes, and by the way, from your nose, which doesn't work over with you, than you ever could using speech, whether it's verbal or in writing. In some ways, speech and that kind of communication is learned behavior. We say that an image is worth 1,000 words. I think it's debatable that you need a little bit of words to go with the image, otherwise it can be misinterpreted. But there is some truth in the fact that we read things into facial expressions, body posture, and yes, to some degree, inflection and tone of voice that just doesn't carry in a purely digital or voice-only kind of setting. And then there's the psychological effect of seeing someone and not just hearing a voice. So it's complex and it's tied into our biology as humans.
Incredible. And actually, I've read the data from, I think McKinsey is like about 30 or 40% of the value of the meeting might be fallen apart because of the kind of, triggers that you just mentioned. Quite fascinating. We have some questions from our colleagues, and that was a great discussion. And if anything, there were a lot of great comments, and thanks for all what we are kind of commenting on, discussing. And one of them, however, interestingly, and the question was more relating to the UAE, but of course it can be applied to any other country. And the question is, if the data is collected by a certain country, can a certain comparative work as research be done with other countries or entities? Your thoughts on that? Maybe Claus, you can answer that. So.
Well, the real answer is it depends on the country, because different countries have different regulation about what you can and can't do. So I don't think there's a universal answer. I know what the answer needs to be, which is that for at least basic research purposes, we absolutely need to be able to put together the data. That's not current state. So the answer to the question as asked is it depends on the country, unfortunately.
Well, yeah, anyway, you're absolutely right on that. And Larry, question or more of a comment for you, but nonetheless, we can take it and reflect it as a question. And in agreement with what you mentioned about that the data, after all, is the fuel of the future, the thoughts is how regulations and policies of a certain country or certain people can help enhance that kind of, better healthcare.
So, I think, and looking at the good of mankind, I think that what's mostly driving this is the security issues, right? And the need for security, and, to a certain extent, potentially the value in the data as well. But assuming that the security could be worked out and the value could be worked out, or a shared value proposition, we should be able to share things more effectively. Now, there are certainly technologies that allow us to share data without, physically moving the data anywhere. So, data can be, maintained, in certain silos in locations and still, work that up. In Klaus's example of the machinery, you can only imagine if there was an easy way to compare, immediately compare that algorithm with other cohorts obtained on different machinery, and the results would have become apparent that much quicker, or amalgamate the data to come up with a more universal algorithm that would work across a range of technologies. So I think it's a combination of factors, not necessarily the physical moving of the data, which can be overcome by technology, but the security of the data and understanding the value of that data and working those elements out.
Fair. Claus, anything I missed to ask or you'd like to comment or add on?
Maybe we talk a little bit about this notion of explainable and unexplainable AI. I think it's pertinent to the conversation we've had. Right? We're so used to being in a scientific environment where we can explain things. Much of the regulation is actually based on having proven, documented decision paths that say the standard of care is based on, whatever, this is the decision tree. We talked a lot about what you can do with big data. We talked about the fact that Internet of Things is not amenable to human intelligence only. It can't necessarily be codified in a simple decision tree, certainly for the more complex patterns that we're looking for. But we have a fundamental problem that I can train using machine learning and artificial intelligence model, and it will give me, if I did a good job on the data and I didn't get into data bias or bad quality, it will give me insight that's useful but I can't necessarily explain in a scientific sense why it gave me the specific answer it did to a specific question. And that then becomes a problem. Because in fact, in many cases, you're looking for the evidence to get things like an FDA approval. Or you're looking for the evidence in terms of tying it into a medical record. You're looking for the evidence to explain to a patient, this is why I came to the conclusion that I did. And we can't. Because we're not at the point where we have explainable AI. The holy grail for the machine learning artificial intelligence community, and they are working on it from a technology perspective, is to get to the point where we can explain. And you can find a trail of breadcrumbs which represents the evidence that denotes this is why I got to the conclusion that I did, but we aren't there yet. The first time we saw explainable machine intelligence for what it was worth was, I guess, when I watched TV and I saw IBM Watson play Jeopardy. Because it wasn't just about what it said, it was about that backroom thing where these is just a trade of breadcrumbs. These are the clues that led me to believe that that was probably the answer. That was a simple problem, right? It was advanced at the time, but compared to what we're talking about here, that was a simple problem. And it was mostly certain correlation. If you're talking about the kinds of discovery that all three of us have talked about over the last hour, give or take, there's a whole different kettle of fish. It's and understanding what our machine learning intelligence, what the artificial intelligence actually tells us and why, is I think the next frontier in analytical technology.
Oh, that's fascinating. Larry, any thoughts or questions to wrap it up?
Yeah. I wish we had another hour to discuss that. You know, that's exactly right. And you know, that's a major barrier. You know, at least in my field, you know, to someone like you accepting our algorithms, you know, accepting our signatures when they're somewhat of a black box. I'll go as far to say that, you know, we try to deconvolute, as you've seen, and explain some of these phenomena that we're seeing to the point where it may be okay initially to have an algorithm that is more understandable, even if it doesn't perform quite as well. So we look at our signatures, how many features they have. I much prefer a 3-feature signature than a 30-feature signature, as an example. That may perform a little bit better because, you know, who could mentally, you know, comprehend, you know, 30 features, you know, becoming a signature. But that's a extremely important point.
No, by all means, I'm very grateful for both of you actually to kind of like translate all of that and wrap it up. And thank you. I'm going to share my screen again, and I'm going to just show, like, you know, what translated and the nice work that Ransel just brought up. This is actually an upcoming meeting that we have memorial welcoming the Apple Asia Pacific Liver Expert Association meeting. Remember, we are not in Asia, in the US, but because we are in the Pacific Ocean, and same time because it's a world of AI and connectivity nowadays, we'll be welcoming the single topic conference literally December 4 and 5. And as you can see, we're covering the whole globe with one meeting. And if anything, I'm very grateful, especially for Sam Pelbucci from IOT from Claus team, actually, based on the experience we have from the C3, to be able to launch such a meeting for Asia and of course the whole world right here from New York. So with this said, I thank everybody for listening in, and I'll pass it on back to Ransel. Thank you very much.